Welcome to MICIP Monday. Today is November 15th, 2021. This is our second of 5 installments for this series of school improvement. Today, we will look closely at determining if you're focused on the right areas for improvement. Our agenda for the day begins with welcome and introductions, followed by setting the tone for an equitable journey, discovering data and drilling down to root cause that helps refine our focus and determine if we are really honing in on the right areas for continuous improvement. This is followed by a question and answer session to clarify our thinking. We will end with the sketch form and evaluation that provides us with data for continuous improvement in our service to you. Now let's meet the team.
Hi, I'm Carol Ann Paul, an Educational Improvement Consultant at Wayne Risa.
Good afternoon again. I am Vanetta Clark-Tools, a Wayne Risa Education Improvement Consultant. Welcome. Our colleague Russ Robinson will not be here today, and we send warm thoughts to his family and him at this time.
Good afternoon. I'm Sabrina Rudy, Educational Improvement Consultant with Wayne Risa, and I'm happy to be with you this afternoon.
Welcome. My name is Kai Smith, and I'm an Educational Improvement Consultant with Wayne Risa. Happy that you've joined us today. So again, welcome to our MICIP Mondays, session number 2. Throughout our session, you might have questions, comments, or even need clarity on something. Please feel free to engage in our MICIP Mondays parking lot. We would like to invite you to scan the QR code on the screen or use the link in the chat to access our parking lot. Here you will add any information needing clarity, any questions or comments. At the end of our session today, we will hold a question and answer session where those items will be addressed. The Center of Urban Education defines equity-mindedness as a perspective or mode thinking exhibited by practitioners who call attention to patterns of inequity and student outcomes. When you are faced with data inequities, are you asking those powerful, big questions to challenge and push thinking and blaze the trail for impactful, equitable change? Equity-minded practitioners are willing to take personal and institutional responsibility for the success of their students and critically reassess their own practices. It also requires that practitioners are race conscious and aware of their social and historical context of exclusionary practices in education. Alongside that, MICIP process requires districts to assess needs. We assess needs through a data equity collection, more importantly, data equity analysis to determine the right areas of focus to serve 100% of the students in our school's populations. This process is no either or, nor is it linear. So now let me ask you, are you equity-minded? Do you know how to set aside your unconscious bias in order to do this deep work with your school and your school teams to redress the inequities we see in our systems? Now that you have that equity mindset, it's time to set the table. We are understanding that the holidays are right before us, and so the setting of the table is a ritual in some of our households. An understanding of when we come to the table, it's important for us to know that the foundation, which is a table and legs that it stands on, has already been laid. In our previous MICIP Mondays, the foundation was laid, where you learn how to develop a mindset where equity matters and how the inclusion of equity ensures that all the needs of students are being considered. Knowing that, we must have things set in place before we sit and consume data. We're going to continue to set the table today. During our time together, we're going to use a subset of data from Wayne County. The data in this presentation is real. We have altered the name of the school, Amazing Kids Elementary School, for confidentiality. The intention of using live data is to ensure our conversation focuses on the beauty and opportunity in our Wayne County story. What beauty we can find in being truly authentic. Our focus today is literacy, where we will discuss the retention of students based upon the Read by Third Grade law. Now let's pause for an equity moment. Understanding that data equity is crucial to the continuous improvement process. But what is data equity? Data equity involves applying an equity lens as well as an equity mindset to the ways in which districts and schools collect, analyze, and interpret, and also communicate and make decisions based on data, with the goals of acknowledging and addressing those historic and systematic biases, building more equitable policies, practices, and systems. This infographic provides a visual, as well as some considerations for being more equitable in this assessing needs process. With data collection, are you using quantitative and qualitative data to give you a more holistic understanding? Dr. Skelton's research finds that when you use these two types of data together, they can illuminate inequities. Really, are you practicing what you preach? Do your values, assets, perceptions, beliefs, assumptions, patterns of behavior, are your artifacts of policies and practices in sync with your school practices? For data analysis, consider different contexts such as individual, community, political, and historical, as they will inform changes to policies and programs within your school. Also, data should be disaggregated to look at different subgroups to understand what's happening within the different populations. Consider for data interpretation, personal experiences, as well as that conscious and unconscious bias, and how they may influence participants' perceptions. Remember, to viewing data from a variety of perspectives can reduce the potential for one-sided interpretation, the dangers of that single story. When sharing data, carefully consideration should be given to how the data is presented and made actionable for diverse stakeholders. Framing is crucial so that the data is contextualized and less likely to be misconstrued. Speak from an asset as well as a deficit approach, not one over the other. With data-based decision-making, all stakeholder groups should have a seat at the table, especially those who have been traditionally excluded. Also provide decision-making methods that are transparent in order to build trust. Participants should reflect on the impact of decisions after they're made to assess harm and course correction. Consider all of these things when you're looking at data and when you're looking at being data equitable in your practices. This has been your equity moment. Now that you are equipped with an equity mindset, along with your data equity lens, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Vanetta, who will take you through the Discovering Data process.
Hi, thanks for setting such an elegant table for us to feast upon our robust data this afternoon. In Discovering Data, we look at many layers that span across demographics that tell us who we are, processes that define our systems and ways of work, perceptions that validate or challenge who we are and the systems that guide us, and finally, academic data that tells us how our students demonstrate learning, growth, and academic achievement, hopefully across multiple measures. With these things in mind, I invite you to whet your appetite on this quote. At this time, please share any questions, comments, or clarifications about the quote in the parking lot, or feel free to drop them in the chat. Following where the data leads us is easier when we look at the data as a whole and not in individual pieces and parts. Bernhardt reinforces the importance of isolation versus intersection. When we look at demographic, process, perception, and academic data in silos, we miss the big picture. Only by finding the intersection of data measures do we place all of the proverbial food groups on our plate for a nutritious meal that leads to healthy outcomes for all we serve. Data literacy is the ability to collect, analyze, communicate, and use multiple measures of data to continuously improve all aspects of the learning organization, especially teaching and learning. Data use is the ability to transform data into information and then into action to improve all aspects of the learning organization. This is the heart of determining whether or not you are focused on the right processes and outcomes for your school or district. We've already discussed each of the 4 types of data and what they represent. Notice the green space in the center of the overlapping circles. This is the sweet spot of data analysis that helps us to avoid analysis paralysis by taking a team-based approach to data disaggregation. Just like a meal with the right proportions of protein, veggies, carbs, and dairy to provide us with a nourishing meal, the 4 data measures together give us a balanced picture of the health of our school or district. Now that we've laid out our menu, let's dive into our main course. As Kai stated previously, our feast features data from a school in Wayne County whose name has been changed to Amazing Kids Elementary. Amazing Kids Elementary School might be a lot like yours. So with your equity lens and focus activated, let's take in the first course. Which types of data are represented here? What are your initial thoughts and what do you notice? What wonderings do you have? What more data would you like to see? Take a moment to place any responses in the parking lot or drop them in the chat. From the mouths of babes, what are these 3rd graders saying about their learning environment? Based on their responses, do you think they're ready to learn? What might be happening with students who answer sometimes or never to these questions? 92.3% of students always or often feel cared for by their teachers. But what about the 7.7% who don't? And while 96.2% of 3rd graders feel happy and safe in school, is that good enough? For those of you serving middle and high school, we know all too well that these numbers drop the older students get. If all means all, what do we do to serve the minority group of students who do not feel safe and happy in the hallowed halls of Amazing Kids Elementary? Record your thoughts in the parking lot or drop them in the chat. We will continue feasting on our data to discover more about the little learners at Amazing Kids Elementary. Can there ever be too much focus on perception data? Wait, there's more? In the previous slide, students told us how they feel. Now they're telling us about their learning experiences with reading. There are notes attached to each data graphic to better help you analyze what you're seeing, what's being said, and what isn't. Take a moment to consider, how might we be making assumptions, engaging in deficit thinking, or blaming others rather than taking a critical eye to our systems and our own practices in these slides? Edward Deming tells us that every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. What forces in our system may be contributing to the inequities we see here? How might our current practices, processes, and beliefs be contributing to inequity? Bravely focusing on the system and our own contributions helps us identify what is in our locus of control or influence and where we can target our improvement efforts. Embracing a we versus they mindset is a helpful disposition when this is what our data tells us. Please take a moment to put any responses in the parking lot or in the chat. The power of data cannot be denied. As with our quote earlier in the presentation, the data will never steer you wrong. It will always lead you home. The data analysis questions and ideas that I've proposed to you over the last few slides are from the work of Bernhardt, Wellman, and Lipton. By scanning the QR codes on the screen, you can use these tools to harness and release the same power with your school or district data. The data we just looked at is only a snapshot for Amazing Kids Elementary because our time is limited here. The idea is that you will work with your team at your table to intentionally dive deeply into your school or district data to determine if you're focused on the right areas of improvement with an equity lens and the courage to let the data tell the story. The data summary statement is crafted from our initial data analysis, our gap statement, or the area of improvement we want to improve, and the systems and the processes we already use to address the gap. Distilling this information down, our summary statement is this. Because our systems and processes in reading instruction, engagement, and support are not equitable for all students, 10.7% of students who fall in the categories of economic disadvantage, African American, and female are being retained under the Read by Grade 3 legislation in the state of Michigan. Turning things over now to Kai for another equity moment.
Thank you, Vanetta, for helping us discover the data. Now let's pause for an equity moment. Who's at your table? As you are on this continuous improvement path or compass that can take you in many different directions, please consider who's at your table. Who has a seat at your table? An equity-centered continuous improvement approach, you should examine who gets to tell your story. Normally, we would have administrators, educators, people who possess dominant social identities, policymakers, and carefully selected parents. Consider whose perspectives are being left out. Dr. Skilton's research around the notion of the dangers of a single story should lead us to ensure equity of diverse voices at the table, such as refugees, people of color, and students of color, students with disabilities, multilingual students and families, LGBTQ students, classroom teachers, people living in disinvested communities, transitional immigrant students or families, parents, and caregivers. The issue with one perspective is that it can lead us to default assumptions, conclusions, and decisions that may be incomplete and may lead to misunderstandings. Now I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Sabrina, who will help us and lead us further down our assess needs path as we start to uncover our root cause.
Thank you, Kai, for that equity moment. While engaging in the needs assessment, the Amazing Kids Elementary School team has identified their focus and gathered data to analyze. The team conducted an initiative inventory to determine what is already in place to address this area of focus and the effectiveness of these initiatives. The next step was to determine the gap between what the data shows and what the desired state is. At Amazing Kids Elementary, the current state is nearly 11% of African American female economically at disadvantaged students are on track to be retained according to the requirements of the Read by Grade 3 legislation. Our desired state is that all students are reading at or above grade level, so no child is retained. In order to bridge the data discovery with the challenge statement, you will need to engage in a process called root cause analysis. Root cause analysis is the process of discovering the cause of problems to identify appropriate solutions. I want you to think about the ladder of inference. The ladder of inference shows the thinking process we often go through without even realizing it. Our assumptions, values, and beliefs influence how we select data, interpret what is happening, and decide what to do. When discussing the root cause, jumping to the take action portion of the ladder of inference is tempting. We're often under pressure to determine a course of action, and this may lead us to move too fast. On the bottom rung are the facts and reality. Before you jump to any rungs on the ladder, it will be essential to find out what's happening. Know that you bring your perspective to the data analysis, and how we decide what to do depends upon how we understand the problem. This is why before we create a plan, we need to spend time getting to the root cause of a problem and making sense of situations from multiple perspectives. The value in a root cause analysis is the deep discussion that takes place when the team explains their thinking and understanding. Remember to dig deep. Symptoms are often just what we see at the surface. Root cause analysis is the instrument used to examine the causes of high-level problems. It's a precursory tool leveraged when creating the challenge statement. The key to a robust root cause analysis is to ensure that the data summary statement was developed with disaggregated and varied data sources, just as Vanetta had mentioned earlier. Here's one example a continuous improvement team noticed: that many students were entirely disengaged from school. So if the team noted the problem is chronic absenteeism, they might not get to the cause of the barrier if they stop there. So to extend their thinking, the group might ask, who's chronically absent? Who is the system not working for? So remember to ask those questions, to dig deeper beyond just what you see at the surface. There are many tools to help determine the root cause. Two of the tools provided on the MICIP platform are the Fishbone and the 5 Whys. The first that we're going to review deeply is called the Fishbone. The advantage to this tool is to sort your ideas into useful categories. The goal of the Fishbone is to discover the root cause of a problem or event, to fully understand and learn from any underlying issues within the root cause, and to apply what we learn from this analysis to systematically build an action plan. This involves that in-depth discussion of the problem to help inform the team. Carol-Ann will now walk us through the development of the tool and the process to engage in this cause and effect diagram.
Thanks, Sabrina. So as Sabrina had mentioned before, one tool is called a fishbone diagram. It's called a fishbone diagram because it kind of looks like a skeleton of a fish. It was created as a quality control tool and adapted for many other fields, including education. You can use this tool to find the root cause of a problem or identify why and where something is not working. To use the device, you first identify a problem, and this is also known as a summary statement. And you're going to place that situation in the head of the fish. The blue arrow is where you'd place that problem. Next, you work out the possible drivers, and these are located on the outside of the diagram. The drivers are circled in red for you. The drivers are factors that might be part of the problem. Drivers are usually factors that you can control. After, you're going to list the possible causes that are influencing the situation. Now we're going to tackle a problem that affects many people in the United States. So let's pretend that you go to the doctor's office for an annual checkup and she runs some blood tests. Findings conclude that you have increased levels of cholesterol and high blood pressure. The doctor could treat these two symptoms with medication, but your doctor is really good and wants to get to the root cause of the problem. So let's brainstorm in the chat. What are some possible drivers that are affecting cholesterol and high blood pressure for you? Remember, drivers are factors that we can control. So what are some things that might be driving you to have high blood pressure or high cholesterol? Yeah, so I see a few things in the chat. Great, and one of those things listed is lack of exercise. And you're right, that is a factor that can lead to high cholesterol and also potentially high blood pressure. So now that we've identified some factors, let's go ahead and hop on one idea in particular. There are many reasons why we don't exercise. What are some reasons why people don't exercise? Go ahead and brainstorm that in the chat. Yeah, of course. So maybe people are feeling uncomfortable. They're afraid that they're going to get hurt. They don't know how to exercise. They feel like they don't have enough time. They might also not have access to the right equipment, or they feel like they need equipment in order to exercise. So there are many possible causes as to why we might not exercise. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like on a fishbone diagram. So basically, we've completed one rung of the fishbone diagram. You can see that it's exercise. It's listed as one of the drivers. Now let's look at some other drivers and causes. Well, smoking is another thing. Diet and also genetics plays a role. Notice on this fishbone diagram that genetics doesn't have any causes next to it. The reason why is it's not something that we can necessarily control. Now, this doesn't mean that we're not going to put it on the fishbone diagram, but it does mean that we're not necessarily going to focus on it right now. Instead, we are going to acknowledge that it is a factor. So what happens after we're finished with the fishbone diagram? Well, the doctor would bring that fishbone diagram back to you for feedback as the patient. Why? Because if she determined the root cause without further feedback, she might spin her wheels and start working on the wrong driver and causes. If conducting a root cause analysis and using an equity lens, you might want to make sure that you gather diverse perspectives and input by going back to the population in which the summary statement was about. Try to gather feedback from key stakeholders in which the problem is directly affecting. So using our example, the doctor would come back to you and would continue to ask some questions. I'm going to pause there for an equity moment with Kai.
It's that time again. Are you ready for an equity moment? Thank you, Carol-Ann, for taking us to the fishbone diagram. Here's our equity moment. Are you asking the right questions? Change starts with good questions. We know that data is power in the continuous improvement process. As we move down the path of continuous improvement, we are letting our compass guide us in the direction that we need to go. But it's those hard, tough questions that will push us in the right direction along the path of continuous improvement and blaze the trail for impactful, equitable change. Asking equitable questions help you identify when we are utilizing the wrong or the right strategy to figure out what's wrong or right about it, and even to better understand what's broken equitably or what needs to continue to ensure high achievement for all is at the forefront. Or, as Carol-Ann discussed, you might spin your wheels and start working on the wrong driver and or causes, not creating a clear path to the root causes for impactful change. Here are just a few data equity reflection questions that will help drive equitable decision-making for all learners. What inequities are showing up in your data? How might the story change if you include more information from different perspectives? Who is not benefiting from the way things are? What are the system barriers, policies, practices, opportunities, and structures preventing the identified groups from being able to access, be represented in, meaningfully participate in, and achieve positive outcomes from quality instruction and learning opportunities? These are just a few equitable questions. This has been your equity moment. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carol Ann, who will continue with our fishbone root cause analysis process.
Thanks, Kai. So now we're going to go ahead and try out a modified fishbone. All right, so we're going to use that summary statement from before to start a modified fishbone. You could do this with your teams back at your district as well. So let's go ahead and read that data summary statement. 100% of students who were retained due to an ELA MSTEP score below 1252 were economically disadvantaged. Furthermore, African American and female students are being retained in third grade at a greater rate than their peers. So let's do a quick brainstorm in the chat about some possible causes. Remember that data summary statement? So what might be causing that? Let's go ahead and stop there so you can put some things in the chat. Great, I'm seeing lots of things pop up. So many of your causes are directly connected to the predetermined causal categories. These drivers are common in education, but drivers can be decided upon collaboratively through a brainstorm session. So for example, one thing that was placed in the chat is that classroom libraries do not include diverse text. And we realized that because students said that. 71% of students reported not seeing themselves in the text within the classroom. So where does that go within our causal categories? Let's see here. It's going to go into instruction. So that would go into instruction because it's under methods, materials, and resources. But what if I told you that the school library also did not have text that was diverse in nature? So maybe that might go under infrastructure because it's related to resources at a building level. Overall, though, it's really about the conversation that happens around the causes, not necessarily where we put them. Yes, we want to be right, but I don't want your group or you to get hung up on where things are going to go and debate that versus having that really deep conversation around the actual cause. So now we are going to try a modified version of the fishbone, and we're going to do this using data that we heard before, our problem statement. So I'm going to remind you of that problem statement one last time. 100% of students who were retained due to an ELA MSTEP score below 1252 were economically disadvantaged. And furthermore, our African American students and female students are being retained in third grade at a greater rate than their peers. So in our fishbone, let me go ahead and take you on a tour. This is Padlet. And in this Padlet, you're going to notice that there is some read by grade 3 data, and this is our data summary statement. At the top, notice our drivers: infrastructure, leaders, curriculum, instruction, and teacher. So we've placed all of those up at the top in order to start this fishbone process. Now, as a team, we can either brainstorm together about the possible causes, or you could have a silent brainstorm and then come together later in order to talk about some of those causes. So let me place something into our Padlet in order to show you how it's done. So underneath subject, I'm just going to write one of the things that came out of the chat, and that was classroom libraries do not include diverse text. And in this where it says write something beautiful, I'm just going to grab the data that supports that statement. So about 71% of students reported not seeing themselves in the text. And furthermore, teachers report not having diverse text within their classroom libraries. Now I'm going to publish, and you're going to find it right there underneath instruction, that driver, and this could be a potential cause. Now, after I get done and I have a deep conversation with my team, the next step that you can do is to go ahead and you can actually use the thumbs up or thumbs down button, and you can vote, and you can do that as a group. So I can go in and I can say, you know what, I think that classroom libraries that do not include diverse text, that's something very powerful. I think we need to focus on this particular driver. I'm going to give a thumbs up to that. The rest of the team will do that as well, and then have a discussion around that piece as well. So I want to make sure that we think about this one last time. After our fishbone around our summary statement, it's going to be really important to go back to the community and gather further information and feedback from them. Discuss the findings with both internal and external team members. Now I'm going to hand it over to Sabrina, where she's going to talk to you about another way to determine root cause, and that's 5 whys.
Thank you, Carol Ann, for that in-depth look at using the fishbone for root cause analysis. That real-life example is very helpful. Another tool that can be used to engage in root cause analysis, as Carol Ann mentioned, is the 5 whys template, which is also provided on the MICIP platform. 5 whys is an interrogative technique used to explore the cause and effect relationships underlying a particular problem. So the primary goal of the technique is to determine the root cause of a problem by repeating the question, why? Each answer forms the basis of the next question. It works really well with other tools and can even be used alongside the fishbone if it's a large adaptive problem. However, it can also be used as a standalone process. We're going to take this opportunity to see a 5 whys process illustrated in this video.
Sometimes the difference between jumping to conclusions and finding creative solutions can be the difference between night and day. To shed some light on the subject, let's spend a quality minute with Howland Blackiston.
In Thomas Jefferson's time, patriots defended our nation's capital from the invading British. More recently, the Park Service had to defend the Jefferson Memorial from invaders of another sort. The stone in this building was crumbling. What could be causing this decay? It turns out that it was actually the frequent washings of the stone that was creating the problem. The reason they washed it so often was because there were so many bird droppings on the building. Then they asked themselves, well, why are there so many birds in the building? There's an abundant food supply. Hundreds and hundreds of little fat spiders. So then they asked themselves, why are there so many spiders? The spiders were attracted by the midges, thousands of tiny little insects. So they asked themselves, why are there so many midges? Every evening at dusk, millions of these midges emerge in a mating frenzy. Also, at the same time every evening, the National Park Service turns on the powerful spotlights that illuminate the monument. Well, the excited midges are attracted to the light. The solution? The Park Service has delayed the daily lighting of the structure to 1 hour after sunset. The midge population is down 90%, they've broken the food chain, and there are less frequent washings. So, make sure you're working with all the information and get to the true root cause of the problem. The results can be literally night and day. For Duran Institute, I'm Howland Blackiston with another Quality Minute.
As you can see, it was very clearly illustrated how to walk through the 5 whys and how you can get to the root cause of a problem by continuing to ask yourself why. The last step of the needs assessment is to develop a challenge statement. The challenge statement now defines your root cause analysis in 1 sentence. It describes the need, challenge, or opportunity for growth that your continuous improvement plan will address. The Amazing Kids elementary team engaged in this process over a period of time. with the necessary people sitting at the table. They knew that in order to determine the right focus, they would need to consider the following questions. Did our root cause analysis stay focused on factors that are within our control? Have we examined all of the data, including demographic, academic, process, and perception data? Who is represented in this data? Who is not represented in the data? Have we backed up our statements with data? And how do we equitably serve everyone represented in our data story? After engaging in root cause analysis and providing assurances that the team considered the guiding questions thoughtfully, the Amazing Kids Elementary School team determined equitable literacy practices are provided for all students, then literacy instruction will provide improved outcomes toward literacy goals. I will now hand it off to my colleague, Carol Ann, to briefly introduce the next step.
The next steps in the MICIP process is really to create a plan with measurable goals and impact measures as well. But before you do this, you're going to need to consider reflecting on a few pieces found on this slide. So number one, make sure that you draw back to your mission and vision and beliefs and ensure that they're equitable for all. You're going to need to also re-examine your current goals using intersectional data to meet the needs of all learners. And don't forget to drill down to that root cause to focus on equitable goals for all. So during this time, we have only scratched the surface of bringing an equity lens into improvement and identifying root causes through inquiry. You know what? We invite you to review some of the resources, and we're going to place those resources in the chat for you so that we can continue the conversation with you, and also so that you can continue the conversation with your buildings.
Again, on behalf of your MICIP Monday team, we want to thank you for joining us. Please be sure to bookmark the Wayne Risa Continuous Improvement site in your browser, where you can find this and other presentations, as well as the resources needed to help you engage in the MICIP process with strong fidelity. We will now open the chat and the parking lot to hear from you and extend our discussion. Thank you so much again, and have a wonderful afternoon.